Hello, and welcome to our stream. Uh, Great to have everyone here, and I'm joined by the amazing Andy Cutler. So great for you to be here.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thanks for inviting me on again.
Yeah, awesome. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Although I have entered September with a bang, it's absolutely tipping it down with rain outside. So we're well on our way to autumn.
We are, yeah. Me and Andy, both UK Microsoft MVPs here, so we get to hang out a bit. And yeah, both the weather's turned a little bit today. I think summer is officially over as of this morning.
Yes. Officially over, but plenty of stuff heating up around data, and especially Fabric. We've got FabCon next week in Vienna. So I
Yes.
hope, well, obviously, we've had FabCon earlier in the year in the US, and now it's Europe's turn. And you're going to be there, Steve, aren't you?
I will. This is my first Europe FabCon, so really excited for that. It's only the second one I know that's happened in Europe, but yeah, went to the Vegas one earlier the year. That was a lot of fun. So looking forward to the European side, and obviously you're presenting there as well, I believe.
Yes, on the warehouse, on the Fabric warehouse, and monitoring the usage. So it's a session that I've covered before in a couple of FabCons, and we just get under the hood in terms of performance because we need to know exactly what's going on under the hood in Fabric and how much capacity is being used and queries and so on and so forth. Plus, there's going to be some exciting new announcements at FabCon about new features. So I'm going to be talking about one of those new features in the warehouse. So if you're over in Vienna, then there's a whole bunch of great sessions and all the new announcements that's going to happen as well.
Yeah, I think that's what I like about those big conferences like FabCons. I do love some of the smaller ones; they're great fun. The
Oh
big
yeah,
ones that like FabCon, you do get a lot of announcements as well, and it's a great place to hear them because sometimes you hear them and it's you kind of miss a couple. So when you're at something like a FabCon, you get to see, and they typically release a whole bunch of new cool stuff. So it's definitely good ones to go to for that.
it's and this is I think this is one of the things that we've talked about, or before, is it can be quite overwhelming, or I've certainly talked about this before. It can be quite overwhelming with all the information that is available. I think I counted in 1 month. Granted, build was done in May, but I think I counted something like 60 individual blog posts in April alone. So it's an awful lot of information to take in. And this conference is going to be no different. There's going to be stuff posted on the official Fabric blog as things get announced. You know, everyone can just take their time to assimilate the information and pick and choose as well. If you're interested in data warehousing or analytics or machine learning, it's all there, so you don't have to read every single blog post. I don't think I do, to be honest.
I think that's something with Fabric. I know a lot of people were feeling the same when it came out. I've always said, Fabric really wasn't that many new tools. However, it's the first time many users have access to all these tools, especially in the same place. So I
Yes,
think hopefully people now are starting to realize you don't need to know all of it. It's probably a whole ton of you are using Fabric or other similar tools, right? We're going to talk about Fabric today, but other similar
exactly.
tools.
Yeah,
A lot of
it's
vendors are doing the same
subdividing.
thing.
Yeah, it's sort of subdividing it, right? It's because all of a sudden you've got, let's say, everything that was in Synapse Analytics now under the Power BI
Yeah.
interface. Yes, there's been reworked services and new services added, so it's blown the landscape up massively. So yeah, Power BI developers and analysts thinking, "Oh, I've got to learn all about Fabric." No, not necessarily. No,
Yeah.
no. How to interface with it, maybe, but you're not going to have to all of a sudden learn every single thing there is to know about Fabric. So yeah, I just think we're on that journey at the moment of hype becoming reality and everything slotting into place a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think when I started learning sort of data engineering tools, and especially with Data Factory coming from more of a BI world, if anything, there's just now extra tools that can help you do the same thing. But some of them are, to be honest, a bit easier. When I'm trying to squeeze into Power Query and do, actually, I can do it a lot easier in another tool. So if anything, I think it's once you're kind of familiar with it and once you've got your head around kind of the volume of stuff there, don't have to use any of them. But if you do, just use a few, and I think that's a good way to start.
Put all
Definitely
your Power Query into
too much.
Dataflow Gen 2s.
Yeah, there you go. But those of us who do love some data engineering, today this is a feature that was very well received, I think, and there's been a lot of excitement around this. I'm really excited to kind of dig into the views, materialized views here.
It is, and I've put data engineering there, but we're actually going to talk about that for a very short amount of time on a specific slide, and then slide into another form of engineering. But I wanted to put data engineering there as the starting point in the journey here. Um, yes. So shall we
Yes,
get cracking on the materialized lake views in Fabric?
I think so.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Steve. Yes, this is, can Microsoft Fabric Materialized Lake Views deliver the low effort data engineering that we're all after? I put data engineering in the title because there is no reason why Materialized Lake Views cannot be used for data engineering. But we're going to look at an area that Materialized Lake Views can also be involved in as well. So let me just advance the slide on. So a little bit about me. So I run a small boutique Microsoft consultancy called Datahai. So that's available on datahaibi.com. All of my community blogging is all at serverlesssql.com. The astute amongst you who remember and recognize Synapse Analytics probably will know where I got the idea for the domain name from. And you can go and scan the QR code, and that takes you to Linktree. Although my Linktree is pretty simple, it's Linktree Andy Cutler. Couple of shout outs. So, firstly, Data Toboggan. So, this is the community focused Azure Data Platform and Microsoft Fabric conference. It focuses more on the data engineering, data warehousing, data modeling side of things, less on the visualization. We do have some AI sessions in there as well, but we concentrate on those areas. We'll have our winter edition in January, and a call for speakers will be out soon. And we're currently uploading our last conference, which is Cool Runnings we have in the summer. So they're all being uploaded, and half of them are available now on the Data Toboggan YouTube channel. And then my last plug is a upcoming conference, which is the brainchild of Justin Bird and myself, which is called Retro Data. If you are a little tired of the AI marketing and a little tired of constant new features, then Retro Data's for you. It's very boutique. We've got 10 sessions that are covering the staples of data, like query performance in SQL Server, or row level security in Power BI, or the visualization aspect. So that's going to be happening on Saturday, the 23rd of September. Online, it's free. Scan the QR code, and that'll take you to the meetup page to register.
I think we have a perfect little emoji here to highlight this. We have our Clippy AI, so I think we're all on the same board. Sometimes we love just to talk about.
Yeah, Clippy is giving me the side eye, but also my own Clippy here is giving me the side eye.
Sometimes we love to talk about the basics of data. AI is cool, but we like
Yes,
the rest
yes.
as well.
This is the stuff that you can action now. Yeah. So it's just a little offshoot that we've been thinking of doing for quite a while. So yeah. Whoops. So we'll go on to the agenda. Right. Data engineering. And we've got analytics engineering here. So I want to talk about those on the next slide. Materialized lake views are not the first tool or platform to implement what we'll talk about, this style of data loading and transformations. In fact, Microsoft are pretty late to the game here. So we'll go through some options. We'll go through, well, exactly what do these tools bring to the table and how are they similar? And what is Microsoft looking to do with what they're doing here? And we'll go into a demo and we'll go through Materialized Lake Views. We'll go through a standard creation of some views. We can show you what's actually happening. Then I'd like to go through the GenMLV framework, which is a very small framework that I've created, which helps to work with materialized lake views in, I think, a more DBT-like way. You'll see what I mean when we start using it, and I'll explain why I've done what I've done when we start looking at this framework to work with materialized views. And I mean, I'll probably pick your brains, Steve, when we get to materialized lake views, and not ask any loaded questions, but pick your brains about, what do you think is wrong with the current implementation of materialized lake views? Like I said, I've got the answers, so it's all good here. So on the analytics engineering side of things, right, different from data engineering. And when we go through these descriptions, people are going to say, well, hang on a minute, that sounds a little bit familiar. Isn't this just a slight rebadging of what we've already got, which is what usually happens in any industry. And it's happening here in terms of changing the names of things that are very similar to what we've had before. But we've got this term analytics engineering or analytics engineers. And the description of it is that they are taking cleansed data. So they're not responsible for the loading of the source data. They're not responsible for deduplicating or reformatting or checking data types. The data engineering side of things. They're more interested and focused on taking that cleansed data and then reworking it into models for downstream reporting, analytics. So for Power BI, that's going to be taking cleansed data and perhaps modeling it into something that Power BI semantic models love, which is a dimensional model. So we've got that raw data, which is where our data engineers are collecting. So they're going and getting all that data from all those weird and wonderful sources, helping to extract from source systems, APIs, on-premises databases, everywhere that has got data, probably putting in place some manual extraction and importing processes as well, hopefully not too many of them. On the other end, for the reporting side of things, we've got data analysts, we've got people who are building reports and dashboards and distributing insights to the business. And then in the middle, we've got what's being called analytics engineering. So we've got cleansed data. And what I mean by cleansed data is it's deduplicated. Missing values have been computed. We've got reference data that's been added. Data types have been checked. Business rules have been applied. So we end up with data sets that are and should be trusted. So between that raw and between that cleansed has gone through a pipeline of getting the data into a format in which it can then be trusted to be used downstream. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just take that cleansed data and then put it into some awful, horrendous model downstream. It's not mitigating the fact that you still have to go through probably proper modeling practices to get that data into a fit state for reporting, but it's giving you a strong, trusted base of data to work on. So this analytics engineering, it's picking up that cleansed data. If we want to talk about medallion, then picking it up from silver and turning it into gold, turning it into curated data. And they might be building the semantic models, and they may be building some reports as well, but they may be working with data analysts for the data analysts to understand what these semantic models are and how to build reports off it. But of course, now Copilot is integrated, in throughout all the services within Fabric. Then data analysts can ask questions about the semantic model to get what they need. So with analytics engineering, it's focused on, well, taking those cleansed data sets for analysis and reporting. You're using languages like SQL or Python. You're building data models. You're ensuring that the business logic that you've worked through with the business is implemented in the models that you're building. So, yes, you're close to the data, but of course, what's the data without business context? Nothing. So you'll be working with the business on that logic as well. And yes, working with the business, the stakeholders, because ultimately you've got to be delivering trusted data models. Otherwise, as we all know, if the data's bad and the report's bad, that's it. The trust goes out the window, and many a data endeavor has failed because the data has not been trusted. And I've been guilty of that myself. In the past, I've forged ahead with the technical aspects of a data project. And as soon as you put this in front of people, they actually want to start looking at the figures and using the figures. And I've had some very uncomfortable conversations when someone says, well, hang on a minute, what's going on with that graph there? And I say, oh, well, we haven't quite finished the cleansing of the data yet. We're just working through that as we do the end-to-end pipeline. And then there's a lack of trust there. It's difficult to rebuild. Now, there could be also documenting and testing models as well to make sure that there are expected outcomes, that data quality standards are adhered to, and there's alerting put in place if that data quality falls below a certain threshold. So it's a responsible position. And of course, people looking at the definition of analytics engineering might think to themselves, well, hang on a minute, this all seems a little bit familiar. I mean, I myself, 10 years ago, worked in business intelligence development. I took cleansed data. I turned that into models that could be used to build reports on. I built data quality procedures in place to check that. Yes, I did it in SQL. Yes, I did it in SQL Server. But I was doing all of these things. And I think it was DBT that coined the term analytics engineering, like Databricks have coined medallion architecture. It's these terms that kind of get embedded in the hype as we go through the cycle of platforms and people that come into the positions as well. So if this looks familiar, it's probably because it is. Now, options, because like I said, Microsoft playing catch up in this space. We had DBT. So DBT they were called Fishtown Analytics at the time, built a declarative tool. And I understand why they did this, right? Because It's all about frameworks, right? All these tools are all about frameworks. It's all about creating a framework. Now, I've built lots of frameworks over the years, and I did start to get a little bit tired of having to revamp the framework for a new platform and so on and so forth. So I looked to other people that were building these tools that allowed you to use a framework in that tool lets you use for your projects. DBT is very popular. I mean, it did used to stand for data build tools, but I think DBT themselves have kind of rebranded and just said, well, we're not actually data build tools. It's just DBT. The DBT doesn't actually mean anything anymore. But as you can see in that example, we've got a series of objects that have a dependency. So, for example, fact web telemetry small can't load until that staging table has been loaded and those two dimensions have been loaded. They can't load, or dim product row number can't load until stage products is loaded. Now, we don't have to define any of this dependency in our loading processes other than writing our transformations. And then Databricks added a feature to their platform. They used to call it Delta Live Tables. They've rebranded it to Lakeflow Declarative Pipelines. And the reason for that is that Databricks isn't just Delta. I think Delta Live Tables is shoehorning them too much into a specific platform. So it's now called Lakeflow Declarative Pipelines. So if you've heard of Delta Live Tables, DLT, or Lakeflow Declarative Pipelines, one and the same. Lakeflow Declarative Pipelines are essentially built on Delta Live Tables and what's come before. And SQL Mesh. Now, I'm going to be very honest and say that I've touched the sides of SQL Mesh. I mean, there aren't enough hours in the day to get into all of these tools. I am told that it is very good, and some people like it better than DBT. I'm not going to get into that discussion here. This is not about which one is better, because I couldn't say if DBT or SQL Mesh is better. I myself really like DBT, and I also liked Delta Live Tables when I've implemented them before in Databricks. And what do these tools have in common? So we'll go back to this word of declarative. So 4 tools. 4th tool is coming in the next slide. What these tools are all about is not you having to define the schema and having to manage the schema. So if you're used to, let's say, database projects in SQL Server or Azure SQL Database, Fabric Warehouse, in which you are creating a project, you've got your schema, your tables, your data types, and you are deploying that schema to your destination database. Every time you want to change something in the schema, you change a data type, you add a column, remove a column, push that change up into the platform, and then you load your data in. What we're doing here with these tools is that your transformation defines the schema. So if I write my transformation to select from a source table and load it into a destination table, and I define 10 columns, 5 of those columns as integers and 3 of those columns as strings and 2 as date times, what happens downstream is that the schema management is done for me by the tool. So it will create the table, load the table, it will alter the table. Those tools, like DBT and SQL Mesh, work across lots of different platforms. Snowflake, Databricks, Fabric, SQL Server. And the tools are only as powerful as the destination platform. So always look at the syntax of your platform and see whether it supports certain things in these tools. What we're also looking at is, well, this dependency management and this direct acyclic graph, this dependency of those objects. We saw that in the diagram. We're not having to define that manually after we've built our schema and after we've built our transformations. We've all, anyone who's done data engineering or data warehouse development has built loading procedures and then has scheduled those loading procedures in a certain way. So maybe loading procedures trigger other loading procedures. Here, what we're doing in the transformation itself, if it refers to certain tables, those tools can automatically build up a dependency and say, okay, well, you've got a bunch of queries. Query 2 actually needs some objects from query 1. So we'll run query 1 first, and when that's finished, query 2 can run. So it sorts out all of the parallel runnings, what objects are dependent on other objects, and builds this flow. Now, some of the tools, like dbt, will allow you to do a certain number of threads at once. Maybe you don't want to flood your system with all of these parallel executions, so you can manage that. But these tools also have, data validation as well. So tools like dbt and dlt, they've got tests that will validate certain conditions and redirect rows that fail tests and alert you in terms of tests that have failed or become out of the boundary of acceptable values. So that's what they've kind of got in common. Of course, the different tools are going to have different features. I go back to dbt versus SQL Mesh, that are platform agnostic tools. Work with lots of different tools. Like I said, some people prefer SQL Mesh over dbt, and others prefer dbt over SQL Mesh. But they're going to have different maturity levels in their different areas and different features to differentiate themselves. So enter Materialized Lake Views. I'm not so much of a fan of the lake because I would also like to see this in the Fabric warehouse, because at the moment it is within the Lakehouse. So at some stage, I would like to see this functionality expand and be available in the Fabric warehouse as well, which I think it suits it very well. At the time being, it's available in the Lakehouse. And this is what we're doing with all of these tools that we've just talked about. We're writing SQL to define a transformation and the schema itself. So we write our logic that we want to transform data into a certain format. And then we're just leaving the tool itself to manage the schema creation downstream. It's an object. It's materialized. And what materialized means is it physically takes the data, moves it, transforms it, and puts it in a table-like structure. I mean, to me, an MLV is a table because the data is stored. It's not virtualized, it's not a view that's pointing back to the source data. It's the data itself that's been transformed and saved. You can see the files that underpin that MLV just like a table. But we get a new little icon. We've got a flashy little icon in the UI to tell us it's an MLV. But to all intents and purposes, to me, it looks like a table. And again, it's creating a dependency. Now, within dbt, and I would say SQL Mesh, like I say, I'm not a SQL Mesh aficionado, but in dbt, the way that you can build up this DAG or this dependency is that you use a keyword called ref, where you go and reference other queries within your dbt project. And it helps dbt to work out what needs to run before other things need to run. MLVs, they actually take it right back to the basics and simply use the from and the join keywords within a query. So if you've got froms and you've got joins, the MLV will work out, okay, so this is the source object that you're getting data from, and it can build up a dependency, which we'll see as we build up the project. And we've got some constraints as well, right? And we can define what we do with those constraints. We can push them, we can error the rows out and continue with the good rows, or we can just fail the load completely. We've got a data quality report as well. Now, I have actually been having a couple of little problems with the data quality report. So I'll show you an example of the report if the one we create today doesn't work out of the box. Now, I'm going to use the word medallion. Now, I've omitted the word architecture because I'm not getting into that discussion on this stream. But we can use MLVs to load data from one layer to another, right? So if we've got some source data that we've loaded into a lakehouse, and within that lakehouse, we want to do some further transformations, MLVs can help us with that. We can select from the staging tables or the cleansing tables, do our transformations, and insert into the destination MLV. Just a point on the functionality of MLVs at the moment is that, firstly, they're a preview feature. Secondly, they work in a lakehouse with schemas enabled only, which is also a preview feature. Let's hope at FabCon we get some good news about schema enabled lakehouses being generally available, which means they're fully supported. It's worth calling out. People have done some tests. I've done some tests myself about cross lakehouse and cross workspace MLVs. They do work. The problem is it breaks all of the lineage. So you get an error when you're trying to view any of that lineage. So I'm hoping that cross Lakehouse and cross workspace MLVs are going to be available at some point. But that all gets mitigated if you're using a lakehouse with schemas, right? Because in your lakehouse, you can have, your raw schema, your cleansed schema, your modeled schema. But yes, so at the moment, it's the lineage breaks if you try and use it across lakehouses, different lakehouses, and across different workspaces. Now, I think we go into GenMLV. Yes, so this is a little framework that I've created, which we'll go through, where because I'm a big fan of DBT and I like the way that DBT works, I wanted to bring some of that functionality into Materialized Lake Views. So when we go through the standard Materialized Lake View creation process, we'll then also look at this framework as well. It's available on GitHub, so it's Datahai /GenMLV. And what it's looking to do is just let you write the SQL and not worry about having to do the whole creation and management of these materialized lake views. So you can treat it like DBT, which is creating individual transformations in a file structure. And then the process is going to automatically synchronize that into the Lakehouse MLV process. If you change the definition of the MLV, it'll change the definition in the loaded MLV in the Lakehouse. If you decide that you don't want an MLV anymore, you can just remove your SQL file from the file directory and the process will just delete the MLV in the Lakehouse. And it does all this with a metadata file. So it tracks what's been deployed and the last time the schema changed for that MLV. So let's have a look at MLVs. So I'm just going to bring up my Fabric. Now, Steve, can you see my Fabric interface?
Yes.
Good, brilliant. Okay. All right, so firstly, documentation for MLVs. It's in the data engineering documentation. And past all this good stuff, we've got Materialized Lake Views right at the bottom. So it's got everything you need in terms of getting started, all the syntax. If you want to dive in, this is everything you need to get started. But here I've got an existing lake house. So let's just dive into that lake house. And let me just refresh. Let's just load that again. Hang on.
Live demos.
Oh, hang on a minute. Oh, look. My capacity's paused. I'm a frugal man, Steve. Let's have a look at that again.
Keep an
Let's
eye on
refresh.
those demo capacities, and I've
Oh,
forgotten to
I
leave mine
remember
on.
the days of Synapse dedicated SQL pools, of spending all my credits in one glorious hour of massive compute. And yeah, since then,
Yes.
I've regretted it. So what I've done is I've got a lake house. I've shortcutted to a central lake house that's got a bunch of raw data in it. Right. So it's kind of what I do in my environment. I've got a lake house in a workspace that just has a bunch of raw data in. Any other workspaces I create with a lake house, I'm just going to go and shortcut. And essentially, shortcuts mean that I don't have to physically move the data from one place to another to have it available somewhere else. And I mean, what Microsoft are doing with shortcuts is really good as well. So we now get shortcut transformations, which transforms data as it's being loaded in, but also shortcut with, we're going to use the word AI transformations as well, where it can do sentiment analysis as the data is coming in. So it's very powerful. My example data set is web telemetry, right? So we've got a date dimension, we've got the event types, so what people can do in a website. So they can browse a product, they can put a product in their basket, and then they can purchase the product. So it's a typical purchasing funnel. I've got my list of products. So I'll bring those products up here. And we've got some telemetry data as well. So this is people browsing a website, putting items in baskets and hopefully purchasing them as well. So this is just my standard telemetry data that I use for demos and examples. If I switch to the notebook, at the moment, the MLVs are created using SQL available in the notebook. If I expand the cell here, then we just got a SQL query. And let me run that SQL query. And I'm just going to expand the tables and the files. So we've got nothing in files at the moment. We'll run the SQL query. Let's get it. Let's get those starter pools warmed up. And we'll just get a data set back where I'm taking some data. I'm doing a bit of a basic transform. I'm just taking the date and transforming it into a year because my data doesn't actually have a year column in it. And there we go. Right, so I've got some data. Now I'm going to use this table downstream in a loading process when I want to join to some other data to do some analysis and aggregation. So I'm going to use MLVs for this. I can manually create those MLVs. So if I unhide, first thing I can do is create a schema. So this is a schema enabled Lakehouse. So let me run that and create the schema. Let's refresh that and we should be able to see. There we go, MLV. Nothing in it. And now the syntax. So I can create materialized lake view if not exists. There's my schema, and that's what I'm going to call it. Call it what you like, whatever your naming conventions are. I can add a comment and I can add some table properties as well. I can also add constraints and I can also add partitioning if I need to partition my materialized lake view. So let me create that view. Now, I know database developers and maybe DBAs might get a little bit worried about the materialized and view words together, because yes, I know that there have been some issues with tools like this over the years. In dedicated SQL pools, we had materialized views. In SQL Server, we had indexed views. But this is materializing it as a table. It is not auto loading when source data changes. So you have control over loading these materialized lake views. So it isn't a case of as soon as data changes from the sources, it invalidates it and it has to rebuild it as that data changes. Nope, you've got control over refreshing the MLV. That's been, I think, one of the biggest complaints of these types of early implementations, in which when data changed, it immediately triggered a rebuild, which meant that it could, use up a lot of compute, dependent on how complex the transformation was. So yeah, we get some metadata back to say that the MLV has been created. Let's have a little look. I'm going to refresh that. And there we go. And all that the MLV has done is just infer the schema from the source data. Now I could go in there and I could cast, I could change the data type. I could be a lot more bespoke about what data types I want to change that into downstream. But this is about the declarative approach, right? So I'm defining a SQL statement. I'm not defining the table itself. I'm not defining the data types. I can do it here, and then it's all just encapsulated in my select statement. And if you can just see there, we've got a little lightning bolt. I don't think my zoom is enabled at the moment. We've got a little lightning bolt, and that just tells us that this is a materialized lake view. And what I'll do is I'm just going to scroll down. And if I run this metadata operation, then it gives me back all the materialized lake views that currently exist in my Lakehouse. So as you can see, there's the Analytical Endeavors workspace, there's the Lakehouse, there's the schema, and there's the name of my materialized lake views. I can show the schema, or sorry, the creation statement of that materialized lake view. So it holds the actual metadata about that materialized lake view. So I could click on it and show the creation statement. I can rename it. Now, this is the only thing you can do in terms of altering. So I can alter a materialized lake view. Let me just run that. I'll refresh on the left-hand side, and we've renamed the MLV. I can't alter the definition. So if you alter the definition of an MLV, you're going to have to drop the MLV and recreate it again. So I'll just drop the MLV dates table that I've created. And then let's go back in there and refresh. Constraints. Now what we can do is define some check constraints within our MLV. I could put a filter in my where clause to say only go and get the data from this table where the date column is not null. But that would kind of hide the problem. So here what I'm doing is I'm loading all the data from that raw table. I'm defining the check constraint to say if the date column is null, drop the row. And we get some statistics in the data quality report around the number of rows that have been dropped. So instead of ignoring those in the filter, I can bring the rows through and put these check constraints in place so that I know exactly how many rows did it actually drop, so I can go back to my source and check it out. Same syntax. So I'm adding a comment, table properties, and then the as to generate my MLV. Let's just refresh the table. And now I've done a date constraint. So when it's loading or when it's refreshing that MLV from the source, it's going to drop the rows where the date is null, and it will report on that as well. Refreshing. So what I should do is just drop in a little bit of a load just so that you can see that it is actually a table with data. Let's run that. And there we go. Okay. So I've got my data there, and it's actually, well, let's have a very quick look. What we'll do is we'll go to that workspace, go into the MLV, refresh my schema. Oops. View the files, and there we go. Right, so that metadata is going to be about the MLV itself. There's the Parquet file. There's the Delta log. The data exists physically. It's not virtualized. Then on refreshing, now there's a caveat with refreshing at the moment, is that currently MLVs don't support incremental refresh. So everything you're loading in your transform, that's what's going to end up in the destination. Everything in the destination is going to get blown away and recreated. So it's a little bit like doing a full build in DBT every time you run DBT. It blows everything away downstream and reloads it again. So the incremental functionality can't come soon quick enough, and I'm going to be hot on Microsoft to get this in here. Now, when we refresh, we've got a couple of options. So I can omit the full keyword. And what that does is, if I'm just running it now, I haven't changed any data in that underlying table. Therefore, the MLV refresh process hasn't run. It doesn't need to. Why would it run? Why would it have to rerun another process, another loading process, if nothing has changed in any of the tables? If your MLV is based on 3 tables that you've joined together, if one of those tables changed, then yes, it's going to reload the whole MLV. I can force a refresh by using the full keyword, right? So if I run that, then after a few seconds, we get some metadata back and we get full refresh. So it has loaded physically the rows. And let's have a little look at that. I've got the ML. Oops, hang on. Let's just let it load on that. Go back. Let's refresh. I just want to see that in the underlying table, there we go. Right, so 619, there's the full load of our data again. So it's just like a Delta table under the hood. On the data quality side of things, I do actually have a products table where I don't want to load anything where the model name is null. So I'm just going to put a constraint in my MLV products table, like I did with the dates table, to say, well, only go and get me the products where model name isn't null, and then report on the rows that have been dropped as part of this loading process. So let me refresh. And again, on that left-hand side, you've got MLV dates, MLV products, and then what we'll do is look at the interface itself. So if I jump into Materialized Lake Views, so there it is, as simple as it is at the moment, because as you've seen, we've got two MLVs that we've created. One is pointing to a raw dates table, and the other is pointing to a raw products table. I click on my MLV dates, and not particularly useful. We know that raw dates is flowing into MLV dates. There's nothing groundbreaking there. Now I can schedule these MLVs. Oops. Let me just go back there. By hitting schedule, and I can switch the schedule on. And a little bit of feedback from Microsoft is that I seem to be getting a non-English date description and time period coming up there. But I can set that schedule, right? So I can set it to run every 5 minutes. Let's set it to run every minute, just so that we can see it running. And then let's set that for 8 o'clock. I'll apply that, and it's going to start to refresh those MLVs. And we'll see, well, there we go. So there's my previous run of my MLVs. So if I click on that, then the objects that I've ran before are available to view. But let's go back to the lineage. Let's see if I just want to do a refresh. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that there's an in progress refresh. And then it will run through the GUI. And then we can have a look at what's going on in terms of loading that MLV. If you want to look at the logs, then you go into the world of Spark logs. So let's just have a very, very quick look. We'll touch on this very, very briefly. I just want to show you, if you want to dive deep into what it's doing under the hood, then you go into the Spark logs, because that's ultimately what the process is. Leave that running. Ah, there we go. So there we go. So when anyone who's familiar with Spark, we've got what drivers are being used, what nodes are being used, and of course, this will be beholden on what you've set up for your workspace. If we refresh, then there we go. Okay, so completed. We go back to the lineage. Now, I've been working through MLVs, and I thought to myself, well, this is really good. I'm appreciating the fact that I can put these queries together. I can chain the loading processes automatically. Yes, we're waiting for additional features, incremental refresh across Lakehouse, and so on and so forth. So I decided, well, I want to keep track of MLVs because I think this is only going to get better. But how could I make it a little bit easier for myself to work with MLVs? Because I don't really want to have to keep going into a notebook, writing my create materialized view statements and dropping, managing that. So what I did, and it's in, like I said, it's in GitHub. So it's GenMLV. It tells you how to use it and deploy it. but it's a single Python notebook. That's all it is. It defines a set of functions that helps manage MLVs. So really what it's doing, and let me go back. So we're not here to pick through the code. If I go back to my workspace, so what I'll do is I'm going to clean up and drop the MLVs. So get rid of those 2 MLVs that I currently have. Let that run. We'll keep the schema. There we go. So we've got no more MLVs there. We'll go back to the workspace. And I've got that notebook from GitHub. I have not changed that notebook as it exists in GitHub. Now, all you would need to do at the bottom, let me clear the output, is there's this dry run. So we're going to set this dry run flag to true. This basically outputs what the process would do, just so that you can check to make sure that it's going to do, it's doing what you expect it to do. And then you can set that to false and actually run it. Well, like I said, it's very embryonic, very early days. Everything is here in one file. Pick the location that you want to be where your MLVs or the definition of your MLVs are stored and where the metadata file is. But the proof in the pudding is, let's do it. So let me go to the Lakehouse. I'll go back here. And in my files section down the bottom, let's just zoom in a little bit. I'll create a folder called MLV. Then in MLV, I'm going to create 3 subfolders. I'm going to say 01, 02, and 03. Okay. I'm trying to mimic the DBT dependency, because at the moment, what we don't have with MLVs is a creation dependency. And what I mean by that is we've got a loading dependency. So once you've defined your MLVs and created them, if there's dependencies between tables, Fabric is sorting that out all for you. But the creation of the MLVs, the actual deployment, is not currently DAG enabled, if you see what I mean. So I'm sort of introducing this myself by saying, well, I know that I need these MLVs creating first before these MLVs get created. So it's nothing to do with the loading process. It's all to do with the fact that certain objects need to exist first. So I'm going to upload my SQL files, and we'll have a look at those SQL files after we've uploaded them. So I'm going to upload some files. And in my MLVs directory, I've got 3 SQL files. We've got the dates file and the products file that we saw before, but we've also got event type as well. So I'm going to open those and upload them. There we go. And yeah, if we just browse that folder, so we've got the name of the file and we've got date modified. Now this is used by GenMLV to do the Materialized Lake View definition creation and management. So the file itself is named, the prefix is going to be the schema in which you want to create the MLV in. And then the rest of the file name is the name of the MLV that you want to create. So it's MLV dates, MLV event type, and MLV products. So if we go into, let's say, products, I don't define my create statements. I don't define drop, anything like that. All I'm doing is I'm defining my metadata. So if I've got constraints, if I've got comments and table properties, And I'm going to define my transformation as well. Now, products, there isn't an awful lot of transformations. I didn't want to make this demo about the transformations itself, rather the process. So you can do whatever transformations you need. So in here, I've got dates and I've got event type. So now I've got my files in place. I can just run the notebook. Now, the notebook could be scheduled, it could be triggered by some other process, but all I do is I just run that notebook. Now, I've got that dry run set to true because I want it to tell me what it's going to do before it actually does it, because I just want to sense check to make sure that it's going to do what I expect it to do. So let's have a look. I got the session up, and then the code is going to go and look at that MLV directory, iterate through, and pull out what it needs to do. So there we go. So it says would create dates, event type, and products. So let's go and do that now, right? So I finished with my dry run, and I want to create my MLVs. Now, if I refresh, we can start to see that those MLVs are being created. So we have dates, we're going to get event type being created, and then finally, the last one is products. So that's it. Now I can go set up my schedule and it'll work through the dependencies itself. If I rerun the process, nothing's changed. I haven't changed the definition. I haven't changed the definition of the MLV. I haven't added any new files. It's as it is. So if we have a look at this folder, let's go back to the Lakehouse. Have a look at this root folder. I'm just going to refresh the page. We should see we've got this metadata file that's been created. Right, so it's a JSON file, and all it does is it holds the MLV that's been created based on the file name and the date time. Okay, so I've added timestamp and date time, but actually the process is using the date time. Now, why is that important? That date time is important because if I go into my MLV and change the definition, right? And by the way, I'm not going into a notebook. I'm not having to drop the MLV or recreate it. I'm simply changing the definition within the transformation file itself. If I save that, then let's just give the page a quick refresh. Open up that MLV folder. And we've got a different date modified. So this takes about 30 seconds to a minute for the process to recognize that there's been a change. So when I next run the code, it'll drop the MLV dates MLV and then recreate it again. But let's add the other files as well, right? So I'm going to go into the next folder and then upload my fact table. Okay. So this is a transformation in which I'm creating the definition from the web telemetry table, but I'm also creating it from the MLV. Hence why I needed the MLV table, the MLV created before this one is created. So this is why I'm doing my folder dependencies in terms of what is created first. The refreshing perspective, again, it's all handled by the MLV process. The last thing I'll add is the sort of aggregate reporting data that I want out of this, or it could be a table that is fed into a Power BI semantic model. So for example, it could be you're crunching data down from cleansed into modeled that you want to bring into Power BI. So I'm going to add my aggregate for web telemetry events. Let me upload that file. And if we go in, we can see that I've got my metadata and I've got a bunch of joins from that gold fact web telemetry table to my dates, products, and event types, doing my aggregation and grouping. So that's going to output and materialize this data. So let's go back and run that process again. So what we'll do is we'll just set it to a dry run so it tells us what it's going to do. Now, this also manages the creation of schemas themselves. So I haven't created that gold schema yet, but I've defined a gold schema in my MLV naming convention. So it's going to go and create that schema for me in the Lakehouse. It's going to recreate that MLV dates because we changed the definition of it and it picked it up based on the date time of the file. And it's going to go and create those two MLVs, my facts and my aggregates. So let's run it now. So I'm going to go and run my notebook. Let's do some refreshing as it goes along. So there we go. There's the gold schema. So it's created that in the process, recreating that dates. Like I said, this isn't something that you run every time you want to load the MLVs. This is the definition of the MLVs. So this only needs running when you change the definition of your MLVs, right? So this is not something that you run every time you load data. That's all handled by the MLV process itself. So let's have a look at that gold schema. Ooh, okay. I've got an error. Let's have a look at what we'll do is we will have a look at that gold table. We've got the raw web telemetry. We've got the MLV event type. Let's just remove this file and then run that process again. So what I'll do is I'm just going to double, triple check that my definition works okay. So let's open this. Let us open up my notebook. And I'll just run the SQL. Just to make sure that that SQL runs fine. Let's have a look. In fact, I know what the problem is. I'm going to open up. I needed the as keyword. And I'm just going to add one other column, which is date time loaded. So let's just save that. In fact, let me just change the modification because I was a bit naughty and did modifications of the file itself in the browser and not my local file. Now, if we go back to my GenMLV process, I might need to run this a couple of times until it picks up the changes from that file. But there we go, recreating fact web telemetry. Let's just refresh that. It's not schema compliant. Okay. And again, so here's a good example. Your constraints don't act on the source column. They act on the columns that are being brought into your MLV. So you can't say, check this column that exists in this table that isn't part of my MLV. it has to be part of the MLV. So let's run this once more. And we'll see that web telemetry being created. Okay, we've got to wait a few seconds for the file metadata to be reflected as it comes in. So in the meantime, we'll upload that last file, that last MLV file. So I'm going to load the aggregate file. And again, we'll just take a little peek inside. And again, we can add that date loaded if we wanted. So actually, let's do that now. Oops. I'm going to do now as date time as date time loaded. All right, let's save that. Okay, now let's go back and run the process. Recreating that web telemetry. Okay, one last thing. Go into our web telemetry. So what was my error actually that came up with it? Let's go back in. So we've got our. Let's have a look at the query very quickly. Let's just run that to make sure that everything.
Maybe.
Let's have a look. Run this, and of course, as you're doing your development, you're writing your SQL so that then you can deploy as the MLV. What have we got here? It's because of this, right? So let's just remove that for now from our file, because obviously it's adding, it wants to group by, so on and so forth. Let's run our process again. Actually, it's quite nice that these errors are being thrown up by the process so you can see what it's actually doing as we're changing. A column or function parameter with the name DD cannot be resolved. I'm just wondering. Let's run this again just to make sure the select statement is working fine. A column of DD cannot be resolved. Okay, it's not liking something somewhere. I don't know. Nothing to do with this. Let's run that again. No. Dim date. Okay. We'll leave it there from the aggregate table perspective. There's obviously something in the syntax that I am too blind to see it at the moment.
Names. DD year in your group by.
Let's have a look. So we've got.
Oh no. Okay. Oh no. Maybe
yeah.
Not.
Yeah. It's I'm not sure.
Joys of demos.
What is? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's wrong with that select statement. It doesn't like it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the MLV process will just pick these files up, process them. If you want to remove any MLVs, then all you need to do is go into a folder, delete the definition, run the MLV process again. It'll look at what it's deployed using that metadata file. It'll look at the folder and say, you don't have this anymore, and it'll just drop the MLV. So it's just doing some management so that you don't have to worry about running all the creation statements and managing drop. If we have a look at the Materialized Lake Views, then we could basically see the lineage. All right, so if we pick there, now the lineage for that aggregate table would then also have picked up gold, dates, and products, but we've just got the lineage for up to the fact table. So there we go. Yeah, we can go in, we can see what's happening with the lineage of these tables. The scheduling works across all the MLVs that you have here. So it isn't a case of picking and choosing a particular MLV in the schedule. If you want to do that, then as I said, there is a refresh command. Let's unhide those cells, in which you can refresh your lake views. So for example, if in a lake house you don't want certain materialized lake views being run them all through a refresh, and then just trigger the notebook on a schedule. So if we go back here, and the last thing, and I bet this won't work, but I'm going to click on the data quality report and generate a report. And those constraints that we added earlier, they will be surfaced in the report. So instead of filtering them out as you load them in, they just get disregarded from the loading process of the Materialized Lake View, but it gets added as metrics. So you'll be able to view how many rows broke the constraint. I just want to check, and I will just open up a quality report. Yeah, I'm just going to run that at the same time. Let's close that. Now, have they fixed this? Or is it still? No, fine. So it's just still coming up with a system error in terms of going and getting the data. So I'm sure that'll be sorted at some point. Yes, so if we go back to the Lakehouse, and then go to our Materialized Lake Views, then every Materialized Lake View that we've created in our Lakehouse is available here for viewing. We can see the dependency. That aggregate table would have joined to 3 other MLVs. And essentially the crux is that you don't have to do any of the dependency management when it's loading the data. If you've got a whole bunch of MLVs that need loading in a sequence that's defined in your data transformations, it's all going to be managed for you. But yes, caveats, like I explained, is at the moment there is no incremental refresh. You're scheduling a refresh, so there is no automatic refresh if source data changes. That will be good. And yes, you can define a materialized lake view cross Lakehouse and cross workspace between Lakehouses, but the lineage will get broken. So you won't be able to see this, and refreshing gets difficult unless you refresh manually through the refresh command. So I think we've covered everything that I wanted to go through on the MLV. Couldn't quite get that aggregate working, but if anyone wants to jump into MLVs, then the documentation here is very comprehensive. We'll take you through it. And then if you think, well, hang on a minute, I'd like to extend the use of MLVs, consider taking a look at the Datahai GenMLV repo, because that's got, essentially that MLV management process that I went through there. If you just want to spend time defining your transformations and you don't really want to have to go through the effort of dropping, creating, managing the MLVs, then this very simple framework, has got you covered in that regard. So yes, there we go.
Awesome.
Seeing if
Very,
there's
very
any
cool demo. I think we're all up to date with questions as well. Awesome. Well, thank
excellent.
you so much for that. Yeah, it was really, really cool. Very cool framework. Definitely going to be already started the GitHub, so definitely going to be playing around with that. Definitely, I think it's a interesting one, and probably as we spoke earlier, I think this sort of data quality, people coming maybe from more of a SQL world, right? This is very different, different process. And
Yes.
even
Yeah.
in Fabric, we have data warehouses. Are they really data warehouses? You don't have that kind of constraints that you do on columns like you do in SQL. So this is going to be much more important, I
Yes.
think, this
Yeah.
kind of stuff going forward.
Also using the data warehouse almost like data marts as well. Now that we know that data marts
Yeah,
have been deprecated, and that's that citizen developer working with maybe a subset of the enterprise data, then the warehouse is there to be used, fully SQL compliant. But yes, so this process at the moment is SQL based. So people who are comfortable writing SQL will be comfortable using this process.
yeah, definitely. No, love it. I think looking forward to seeing how the materialized lake views grow.
Yes,
As
yes, definitely.
with a lot of tools in Microsoft, they like to release early, get a lot of feedback, and improve over time.
Iterate is yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely needed, I think, and a great addition as you went through, just to give some governance and some help in what you're doing.
Yes, yeah. Just make it, because the whole point of MLVs is to take the hassle out of declaring your transformations, right? So we just want to help it along a little bit by adding a little something to manage the process as well. But yes, so as this, like I said, I'm hot on Microsoft about this feature, and I really hope they build on it. And we got some fundamentals. Yeah, we've got some um, incremental refreshing, cross workspace. I think are like the things that need to be in there, and then they can build on that.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, no, I really appreciate you hanging out. I know. Obviously, we said we're off to Vienna next week. I think you're actually off to Scotland momentarily tonight, to go to Data Scotland
Data Scotland's tomorrow. Very much looking forward to that.
tomorrow.
Yes,
Yes.
and then off to Vienna next week. And I'll see you there.
Yeah, awesome. Lovely, lovely little conference sessions we have in mid September, which is always fun. But no,
Okay,
thank you so much. That was really cool, and I loved seeing through all the stuff you built there as well. So thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on in the not too distant future when we get some more upgrades to MLVs.
excellent. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on as well.